I left him without telling him I was pregnant. 7 years later we met again. The boy saw him first. That was the thing nobody could have planned for. Zara had spent 7 years rehearsing for a lot of things, the loneliness, the late nights, the questions her son would eventually ask that she didn't know how to answer. But she had never once rehearsed for this. For the moment when her 6-year-old son, Tobias, would stop walking in the middle of a marble-floored hotel lobby in Seoul, tug her sleeve, and stare at a man across the room like he was looking into a mirror that hadn't been invented yet. "Tobias, come on, we're going to be late, Mom." His voice was different this time, quieter, confused in that deep, searching way children get when something is true before they understand why. Zara followed his gaze, and the entire world collapsed into a single point. Park Seon-oh. He was standing near the reception desk, flanked by two men in dark suits, his phone in his hand, his jaw set with the kind of authority that hadn't been there 7 years ago, or maybe it had, and she had just been too in love to see it clearly. He was wearing a charcoal suit. His hair was cut shorter now. The boyishness was gone, replaced by something colder, more polished, the way expensive things look when they've been through enough heat. He hadn't seen her yet. Tobias tilted his head. "Why does that man look like me?" Zara's hand found her son's shoulder. Her chest stopped working. The answer sat behind her teeth like a stone, "Because that man is your father," but she swallowed it back down, the way she had been swallowing it for 6 years, and she turned her son away from Thelabi and walked as fast as she could without running. If you're already feeling this story, do me a favor right now, hit that like button and subscribe. We're only just getting started. Her name was Zara Mensah, and she had arrived in South Korea 5 years before Tobias was born with nothing but a British passport, a journalism degree from Leeds, and the stubborn certainty that she was going to make something of herself somewhere the world wasn't expecting her. She was Ghanaian-British, her mother's jollof rice and her father's gospel music, and a childhood split between Accra and a small council flat in Manchester. She was funny. She was sharp. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and rearranged it without meaning to. She got a content position at an English-language media company in Seoul, learned enough Korean to embarrass herself, and then enough to hold conversations, and slowly, painstakingly, carved out a life. Park Seon-oh had walked into that life like a storm that looked like sunshine. She met him at a press event for a tech company his family had just acquired. He was there. Everyone in the room knew it, which meant everyone in the room was performing for him. He wasn't performing for anyone. He found her in the corner, arguing quietly with a translator about a misquote, and instead of walking past, he stopped. "You're right," he said in English without introduction. "That quote was mistranslated." "I was there." She looked up at him. "Were you also going to say something about it, or just observe?" Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly. Something better than a smile. "I'm Seon-oh," he said. "I know who you are," she said. "I'm Zara, and I still need the correct quote." Gave her the correct quote. He also gave her his number, which she didn't use for 2 weeks because she didn't want to be the woman who called the Chaebol heir. When Stephanie texted him a single line about a documentary she thought he'd find interesting, he responded in under 30 seconds. That was how it started. What followed were 8 months that Zara had spent 7 years trying to file away in part of her memory she didn't visit anymore. Late nights in his car parked outside Pajangmatcha stalls, eating spicy rice cakes and arguing about everything from Korean cinema to British colonial history to whether or no emotional unavailability was learned or inherited. Him showing her how to properly fold the lettuce around galbi, the warmth of his hands over hers. Her teaching him to dance to Afrobeats in his apartment at midnight, both of them laughing too hard to get the steps right. He was different from what she had expected. Quieter. More curious. He asked about her family with a genuineness that caught her off guard, wanted to understand her culture, the way you want to understand something you're planning to keep. He flew to Accra with parents just once for a week, and sat with her grandmother in the courtyard and listened to Edto stories for 3 hours without checking his phone. She fell in love with him the way you fall when you don't mean to, completely, suddenly, and without any safe place to land. "Matter what happens," he told her once, lying on the floor of his apartment because he'd given up on the sofa, I'll choose you. You understand that, whatever pressure comes. She believed him. She shouldn't have believed him. The pressure came quietly at first. A comment from his mother about optics. A meeting she wasn't invited to. A party where she was seated at a table with the assistants while Seoul was at the main table and couldn't quite meet her eyes across the room. She told herself these were small things. She told herself love didn't require comfort to be real. Then a story appeared online. She saw it on her phone on a Tuesday morning, still in bed, still warm from sleep. A photograph of her, taken without her knowledge outside Seoul's apartment building, and a headline that made her stomach drop to the floor. The story said she had fabricated a pregnancy to manipulate the Park family heir. That she was a foreign opportunist who had targeted Seoul deliberately. That sources close to the family had confirmed she had demanded money. There were quotes. There were insiders. There was a manufactured red paper trail she had never seen before in her life. None of it was true. All of it was devastating. She called him. He answered on the fourth ring, and the silence before he spoke told her. Everything, Zara. Tell me this isn't your family. A pause. It's complicated. Seoul, tell me you're going to say something publicly. Tell me you're going to defend me. Pause. Longer this time. The company is in a sensitive position right now. My father, there are investors involved, and if I publicly contradict the narrative. She repeated the word slowly, the way you repeat something to make sure you heard it right. That's what you're calling it. Trying to protect us both. You didn't choose me, she said, and she hung up the phone. She sat on the edge of her bed for a very long time. Her hands were shaking, her jaw wasted. She was not a woman who cried easily. Her mother had raised her past that, but sat there in the morning light and felt something inside her break apart in a way she understood was permanent. That afternoon she booked a flight home. She did not tell him she was pregnant. She had found out 3 days before the story broke. She hadn't even told herself yet, not really. The test was still on the bathroom counter, and she was still in that stunned, suspended place where the information exists but hasn't landed. She had planned to tell him that week. She had imagined how his face would look. But sitting on that bed with a shaking phone and a fabricated scandal and the echo of hissilence, she made a decision. If he wouldn't choose her when she had nothing to offer but herself, she would not give his family a child to weaponize. She would not spend the next 18 years watching her son used as leverage in a boardroom she would never be welcome in. She would not become a cautionary tale. She left. 7 years is long enough to build a life and not quite long enough to stop missing the one you left. Zara was 34 now, living in a modest apartment in Mapo-gu, back in Seoul because life had a sense of humor. She had her freelance writing work, her small routines, her tight circle of 2 friends who knew when to ask questions and when to simply pour wine. She had Tobias, who was curious and relentless and kind, who asked about his father with the careful persistence of a child who senses a door and hasn't been told yet whether it opens. "Does my dad know about me?" he had asked once, matter-of-factly over breakfast. "It's complicated, baby. That's what you say when the answer is no, but you don't want to say no." Was 6. She had stared at him over her toast and thought, where did you come from? She knew, of course, where he came from. And now, in the lobby of the Grand Saran Hotel on a Thursday afternoon, standing in the service corridor with her heart in her throat and her son's hand in hers, she was confronting that question in a whole new way. She had taken a temporary position coordinating event communications for a corporate summit. She needed the money. She had not known, could not have known, that Park Seon-oh was the keynote speaker. She found out when she saw his name on the printed schedule that morning. She had told herself it would be fine. Seoul was a big city. The hotel had 40 floors. She would stay in her lane, do her job, and leave without incident. She had not accounted for Tobias having a half day at school. If this story is already hitting different, drop a comment below. I want to know if you saw that coming. She spent the next hour trying to think clearly and failing completely. She found a quiet room near the event prep area, settled Tobias with his tablet and headphones, and stood in the hallway pressing her palms flat against the wall like she was trying to push the building over. She could leave. She could invent a family emergency, collect her fee, and disappear again. But she needed the money. And she was tired of running. And some quiet, treacherous part of her, the part she had never fully silenced, wanted to know what 7 years had done to his face. What she did not want was for him to find her first. He found her in 40 minutes. She was crossing the mezzanine level with a clipboard, head down, moving fast when she heard his voice behind her. Zara, one word, her name. And everything inside her went very still. She turned slowly. He was closer than she expected. 3 feet away, no assistants, no suits flanking him now, just Park Seon-oh with his hands at his sides and an expression she couldn't read, something between controlled fury and shock. "I thought I saw you in the lobby," he said. "I work here." "The summit, I know why you're here." His voice was quiet, careful. "I confirmed it before I came up." He paused. "You've been in Seoul. I came back 2 years ago." 2 years, something moved across his face. "And you didn't," he stopped himself, breathed. "The boy," her blood turned cold, "the boy in the lobby," he said. "He was with you. He's my son." "Old is he?" The question landed like a stone dropped from a great height. She could see him calculating. She could see the math happening behind his eyes. Seon-oh. "How old, Zara?" She looked at him for a long moment. 7 years ago she had made a decision. She had been so certain it was right. Standing here now in this hotel mezzanine with him 6 feet away and the calculation written all over his face, she felt the certainty crumble into something much more complicated. She said quietly. The silence that followed was the longest of her life. "Take a walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. They found a conference room that wasn't in use. He had a keycard that opened everything, and he closed the door. And they stood on opposite sides of a long table like it was a border neither of them was ready to cross. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said. "Seon-oh, tell me I'm looking at this wrong. Tell me you were with someone else. Tell me the timing is off. Tell me anything that makes the thing I'm currently thinking not true." She said nothing. He put both hands on the table and looked down. His jaw was working. She had forgotten she had made herself forget how to read his silences. This one felt like the inside of a storm, perfectly still at the center, catastrophic at the edges. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, quietly, dangerously quietly. "You know why. I know what I did. I know I hesitated when I shouldn't have. I know I let them run that story without." He cut himself off, pushed away from the table, turned his back to her. "I spent months trying to reach you. I flew to London. I called your mother, Zara. She said she didn't know where you were." She blinked. "You called my mother?" She said you needed time. He laughed once, a short, broken sound. "She didn't mention the child. She didn't know, not until later." He turned back around. His eyes were a devastation. "You raised him alone." "I raised him well." "That's not what his voice cracked. "That's not what I asked. You raised our son alone because of something I did. Because of what you didn't do." The correction landed. She watched it hit him. Something in his face gave way, and for a moment she saw it, the grief, the guilt, the 7 years of something he had been carrying that she had never let herself imagine he might be carrying. She had kept him a villain in her mind because that was the only version of the story that let her survive it. "I confronted my father," he said. 8 months after you left. I made him admit what faded the planted story, the fake sources. I took it to the board. I cut them off from 2 major accounts as leverage." His eyes didn't move from her face. "I just didn't have more to tell." The room was very quiet. Zara sat down slowly because her legs had stopped being reliable. She pressed her fingers to her forehead. "I didn't know that. I know you thought. I know what you thought." He came around the table, not quickly, not with the certainty of Ammon who knew he was welcome, but steadily. Pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "What's his name?" A long moment. "Tobias." Broke open on his face when she said it, not dramatically, quietly, like a window latch giving way. "Can I meet him?" he asked. And here is where you need to understand something about Zara Mensah. She was not a soft woman. She had built herself out of hard choices and harder mornings. She did not give things away easily, but her son had looked at Park Seon-oh across a hotel lobby and seen himself. And Zara was tired. Not tired of being strong, she would be strong until she died. She was tired of being strong for the wrong reasons. Tired of protecting her son from a man who, it was turning out, had been looking for them. "Down the hall," she said. "There are moments that rearrange the architecture of a life." Park Seon-oh had had a few off them. His grandfather's death. The day he found out what his family had done to Zara. The morning he had stood in a flat in Notting Hill that she had already cleared out, holding a note from her building manager that said she was gone. Nothing had prepared him for this. The boy was sitting cross-legged on a chair with a tablet in his lap, headphones around his neck, and he looked up when the door opened with the specific expression of a child who has been minding his own business and is mildly suspicious that this is about to end. He looked at Seoul. Seoul looked at him. The resemblance was not subtle. It was not the kind of thing you could talk yourself out of or frame another way. It was the shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw, the particular way he held his chin, all of it threaded through with Zara's coloring, Zara's sharpness, Zara's warmth. A perfect, impossible combination of two people who had loved each other and broken each other and apparently made someone extraordinary in the process. Tobias, Zara said, her voice careful, this is Mr. Park. Tobias studied him with the unfiltered assessment of a 6-year-old. You were in the lobby, he said. I was, Seoul said. You were staring at my mom. I was, considered this. Why? Seoul crouched down slowly so they were eye level. He looked at this boy, his son, Hisson. The word kept arriving and he kept having to absorb it, and he tried to find something honest. Because I knew her a long time ago, he said, and I missed her. Processed this with great seriousness. Did you have a fight? Seoul glanced up at Zara, who was watching from the doorway with her arms crossed and something unreadable in her eyes. Something like that, he said. Mom says fights are okay as long as you both say sorry after. That's good advice. She says the sorry has to be real though, not just words. He narrowed his eyes very slightly. She can always tell the difference. Seoul looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back at Zara. Can I? He said. What happened next was not simple. Real things rarely are. Seoul canceled 3 meetings. He did not care. His assistant texted him 4 times and put his phone face down and left it there. He and Zara sat in the conference room for more hours. The door opened now, Tobias visible in the next room having commandeered a bottle of sparkling water and declared it the best drink he had ever had. They talked about the things they had never finished talking about. The things that had been left half said in the middle of a phone call 7 years ago. She told him about the pregnancy test sitting on her bathroom counter the night everything collapsed. He told her about London, about the empty flat, about the 3 months of private investigators who hit dead ends because she had moved twice in the first year. She asked him why he had never married. He looked at her like that was the most unnecessary question she had ever asked. Not pretend that's a mystery, he said. She looked away. Her throat moved. I'm not forgiving you today, she said. I want to be clear about that. 7 years is not resolved in a conference room in 2 hours. I know. I'm not doing anything that's bad for Tobias. He's the whole thing. If there's any version of this that hurts him, we stop. Agreed. I mean it, Seoul, Zara. His voice was low. He is my son. You think anything in the world would make me want to hurt him? She studied his face for a long time. 7 years ago, she had been good at reading him. She wondered if she still was. She decided she thought she was. She said finally, I don't think that. Tension in the room shifted. Not resolved, not finished, but shifted into something that had the faint, tentative shape of a beginning. And then Tobias appeared in the doorway with the sparkling water bottle and said, with great authority, Mr. Park, do you know any good restaurants? We were going to get food but Mom forgot to check the reviews because she was busy being stressed. Zara closed her eyes. Seoul looked at his son and for the first time in 7 years laughed like he meant it. Before we get to where this ends, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me what you thought of Tobias, because that boy just carried this whole scene on his back. The confrontation with his family happened 3 days later. Seoul requested a formal family dinner, his parents, his aunt who had been instrumental in the scandal, 2 board members who had signed off on the media campaign 7 years ago. He sat at the head of the table, which was not his usual seat, and waited until the soup had been served before he began. He told them what he knew. He told them what he had confirmed. He told them about Theplanted story, the manufactured evidence, the deliberate character destruction of a woman who had done nothing to deserve it. His mother said, We were protecting the family, he said. You were protecting an inheritance. That's not the same thing. His father said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. His aunt said, "She was never appropriate for." He said, "She raised my son, alone, for 6 years because of what you did." His voice wasteful. He had not come to the table to perform anger, he had come to be absolutely clear. "I am going to be in Tobias's life. I am going to be in Zara's life if she'll allow it. And if anyone in this room creates a single problem for either of them, a story, a rumor, a phone call, a word to a journalist, I will remove myself from this company entirely. The shares transfer to charity. I've had the paperwork drafted." The table was silent. His father looked at him for a long moment. "You're serious," his father said. "I've been serious for 7 years. You just weren't paying attention." Folded his napkin, stood up and left the dinner. Outside in the cold Seoul night air, he called Zara. She picked up on the second ring. "It's done," he said, a pause on her end. "Are you okay?" He hadn't expected her to ask that. The kindness of it caught him off guard. "I think so," he said. "How's Tobias?" "Asleep. He made me read him 4 chapters of his book because apparently 3 wasn't sufficient." She paused. "He asked about you today." His chest tightened. "What did he ask?" "He asked if Mr. Park was going to come over again." She was quiet for a moment. "I told him I didn't know yet." "Would you like to tell him?" The pause before her answer was long enough that he felt it. "I'd like to tell him, yes," she said finally. "But slowly. You have to understand what slowly means for me." "Tell me." "It means we don't skip steps. It means he doesn't call you dad until he decides to, on his own when he's ready. It means if something feels wrong I say so and you listen. Listen. You say that now, Zara." His voice was steady. "I have been listening to the sound of your absence for 7 years. I can listen to anything." Silence. Longer. And then quietly, "Okay," she said. "Then yes, he can come over." The first Sunday they all spent together was ordinary in all the ways that mattered. Seoul arrived at noon with ingredients because Zara had mentioned Tobias liked rice. Ange had also, in the same breath, mentioned she was getting tired of making it the same way. He cooked. Tobias stood on a step stool and supervised with the seriousness of a professional critic, offering commentary that was sometimes helpful and mostly not. Zara sat at the kitchen counter and watched the two of them navigate each other, careful at first, and then less careful, and then just easy, the way things get when they're true. After lunch, Tobias showed Seoul his drawings. He was a serious drawer. He drew spaceships and animals and buildings that looked like they had been designed by someone who thought gravity was optional. Seoul looked at each one for a long time and asked questions that were actual questions, not the performed interest of an adult humoring a child. Tobias noticed. He noticed with the precise radar of a child who had spent 6 years being the most important person in his mother's life, and had therefore become very good at identifying genuine attention. At some point in the afternoon, while Zara was in the kitchen cleaning up and Seoul was sitting on the floor looking at a particularly complex spaceship drawing, Tobias said, "Are you my dad?" The apartment went very quiet. Seoul didn't look away from the drawing. "What makes you ask that? You look like me. Simple, factual. And you look at my mom like the dads look at the moms in her shows." Seoul set the drawing down slowly. He looked at Tobias, this child who had his eyes and his jaw and somehow, inexplicably, his grandmother's way of tilting his head when Hugh was thinking, and he made a choice. He said, "I am." Tobias took this in. He didn't look surprised. He looked like someone who already knew things were and had asked the question to confirm it. "Were you lost?" he asked. Something moved through Seoul's chest. "Something like that." "My mom finds things," Tobias said, nodding seriously. "She's good at it." He picked up the drawing and handed it to Seoul. "You can have this one. The rocket has 2 engines. It's faster." Zara, standing in the kitchen doorway where she'd been for the last 30 seconds, pressed her hand over her mouth. Seoul did not kneel in the middle of the story, the way things happen in stories. Real life is less arranged. Real life is a series of ordinary moments slowly adding up to something that wasn't ordinary at all. But a few weeks later, at the end of a Sunday that had gone on longer than planned, long enough for Tobias to fall asleep on the sofa with his head on Seoul's arm, Seoul looked at Zara across the coffee table and said quietly, so as not to wake the boy, "I know I don't get to come back without cost. I know you are not the same woman who left, and I'm not the same man she left. I'm not asking for what we had. I'm asking for a chance at what we could be. Zara looked at him for a long time. She was a woman who had survived 7 years by being careful, by not hopping for things that had a history of not arriving. She looked at her son, asleep and heavy between them, holding Seoul-oh's arm the way children hold the things they've decided belong to them. You missed so much, she said softly. I know. It matters that it was lost. It does. You can't just, she stopped. You can't just arrive and expect it to be whole, not expecting anything. His voice was low, steady, the voice of a man who had learned through years of absence what he should have known before. I'm just asking to stay. Apartment was quiet around them. Outside, Seoul moved and hummed and carried on, being enormous and indifferent. Inside, on a sofa with a sleeping boy between them, two people sat with the wreckage of what they'd been and the uncertain architecture of what they might still become. Stay, Zara said, for now. Wasn't a grand forgiveness. It wasn't a clean ending, but it was a door open, not slammed, the light coming through. And sometimes that is the whole thing. Tobias held both their hands on the walk home that evening, swinging between them with casual authority of a child who had already decided how this story ended. Seoul looked at Zara over the top of their son's head. She was looking back. Neither of them needed to say it. Some things are louder as silence. Some love stories don't end. They wait. And then they begin again, quieter and truer and harder and better, not where they left off, but somewhere further along, somewhere that could only be reached by going through everything they went through. That is the only kind of love worth the distance. If this story moved you, give it a like. It costs you nothing and it means everything. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And drop a comment below. Are you Team Zara for holding her ground, or did Seoul redeem himself for you by the end? I'll see you in the next one.